Hello again and welcome to my channel. This video is being made in response to a couple of comments about the Accuphase clone preamp that I've made quite a couple of videos about now. The comment was, this preamp can't be any good because it's cheap and made out of cheap crap components. It is cheap. If you've seen the videos I've made on it, you can quite clearly see it does not have poor performance and in fact exceeds many preamps almost at any price. Here's the question: which of these two preamps will sound the best? One of them is the preamp kit, which is about $20, give or take. The other unit is a complete finished preamp ready to plug in basically, and costs in excess of $500. Instantly your mind would think the $500 one will sound better. Your common sense tells you that that's going to be the case, isn't it? What if I told you they will both sound exactly the same? And I'm going to show you why that is the case. And it's really because clearly when I showed you the original preamp, it was just a printed circuit board with components on it. You had to add a power supply, volume pot, and probably the most expensive feature you would have to add is a box to put it in. Now recently the postal rates from China have gone through the roof. If you buy a case for even a $20 printed circuit board, you're probably going to pay 200, maybe more New Zealand dollars to put it in a box of any quality to make it look like a professional piece of equipment. Now this Accuphase clone board is available in many different versions. The cheapest one is the one that I reviewed, where you can buy the bare printed circuit board and fit the components of your choice. If you want to spend a fortune on capacitors, you can use audio grade capacitors, but I think I've shown you already that doing that hasn't actually changed the sound or measurements at all. But this is the cheapest way to buy this kit. Another way is to buy kit of parts, as indeed myself and Ron have done and reported the results. Another way is to buy the kit complete assembled product. The next version of this, which is nearly the same, is a complete kit, but this time it includes relays and a switch, so you could have 3 inputs. This is one that I reviewed 3 years ago, so if you want to see the video of that, it's very similar to the one that I've made here, but I'll put the link in the description, so if you want to have a look at that. All line level input. You cannot feed a turntable, or if you like a moving magnet cartridge, because for that you will need a different preamp completely with RIAA equalization, and it will inherently have a 3 or so millivolts input, which you could then feed that preamp into this preamp if you so wished. Because there are so many different vendors supplying these products, I'm not endorsing any particular one, but it's just to show you really the options that are available to you. Now the third option is this one. It has the, I hesitate to say advantage, but it offers balanced and unbalanced inputs and outputs. Obviously it puts the price up quite a bit, but it's basically the same board that I've shown you previously. But it appears to have 4 separate boards in. Instead of having the left and right channels on one board. They've split them up into separate boards. And that also means that instead of using a 5532 preamp chip, it uses the 3-4 preamp chip and uses one on each side. This is all theoretically better to use a separate chip, but in reality it will make no real difference. Honestly, it will not make any difference. You're talking about the crosstalk potentially of separate chips being slightly higher, but the crosstalk on the 5532 combined, a 2-in-1 if you like, is over 90 dB. So if you gain an extra 1 or 2 dB, I suppose on paper it's better, but in practice it will make no audible difference. But this is what the route they have gone down, and you'll see from the picture here that there are clearly 4 individual boards on one board, if that makes sense, because they've used one board for the left and one board for the right, and then the same thing again they've used for the balanced input and the balanced output. Instead of having it all on one board, you've actually got it split into 4 separate boards. Theoretically, it's better done like this, but in practice, I promise you it makes zero audible or measurable difference. It really does. Now, the other thing you will notice on this particular version, it has 2 power transformers. Again, in theory, it's better, but in practice, again, it will make zero audible difference. I've just dropped my notes, excuse me. I'm getting excited, that's what it is. I'll put my notes down there. If this was a power amplifier, there would be a little justification in using 2 power transformers, simply because the current on a power amplifier will vary between quiescent conditions, which would be, I don't know, 30 or 40 milliamps, and up to quite a few amps when driven hard, or particularly into 4 ohms. So the idea of a separate power supply for each channel will actually give you more potential power, simply because the voltage won't drop, because if the voltage drops, so will the maximum power. So the idea of 2 transformers and, if you like, 2 completely independent power supplies does largely make sense. But we're not talking about power amplifiers, we're talking about preamps. And having 2 power transformers will honestly make zero measurable and audible difference, simply for this reason. The preamp uses very low current, and the current is the same whether there's signal going through or not. I mean, there's a small variation, but you're talking about a few milliamps, 10, 15 milliamps maybe. And it also has a stabilized power supply. So any variations in current, the voltage will be the same. So having 2 transformers adds nothing to the project. It just looks good and it puts the price of the product up. This has balanced and unbalanced inputs and outputs. My question would be, why would you want balanced inputs and outputs? The idea of a balanced, we'll call it circuitry, is that It stems really from the broadcast industry and the professional industry, where your preamp or any piece of equipment could be 30, 40, 50 or 60 feet away from the actual power amplifiers. This is particularly true in cinemas. The idea is that because the cables are long, they could be susceptible to interference of some sort, so it makes 100% sense to use balanced inputs and outputs. In the real world of audio, for you and me at home, where your preamp is going to probably stand next to your power amplifiers, it will make no sense at all to use balanced inputs and outputs. It will not affect the sound in one tiny fraction. It really won't. You might gain a couple of dB or so better signal to noise ratio. But when you're talking about 90 dB signal to noise ratio on a basic unbalanced circuit, adding 2 or 3 dB, really, you will, if you can't hear it at 90 dB, adding 3 dB or even 6 dB will really make no difference. If your product, let's say your DAC or something like that, does have a balanced output on it, you might as well use it, because this preamp has both. So whatever and you can switch between them. So you could have a number of different inputs. But please don't expect the sound to zoom up in quality, because it will not. It will sound exactly the same. Now, another slightly strange thing about this particular board is, if you look at the volume potentiometer, it is a 4-pole one. In other words, it's 2 stereo pots on one shaft, and it's simply because they've used a different pot on the balanced connections than the unbalanced ones. Not totally sure why they've done that, but that's what they've done. And you'll notice, if you look at the back of the potentiometer, there is actually a motor on the back, which is unused in this particular circuit. The reason that is on there, I don't really know, because it adds quite a bit of cost. But I think I may have the answer to that, is that you can buy this particular board with a remote control, but it adds about $200. And if you look at AliExpress, you'll see a version that sells for about $650, which does include nearly the same board with a couple of extra bits on it. It uses the actual motor and remote control. Don't ask me to tell you if you can introduce remote control on this particular preamp. So now let's have a look at the final version that I'm going to show you today. This is basically the previous board in a cabinet. It puts the price up quite dramatically. At the time that I'm making this video, this particular board and the board in this particular chassis, there's discounts of between 30 and 50%. So it actually is pretty good value for money. There's not much I can say about the finished product, other than the fact that it's in a case and it's got all the sockets on it and it's ready to go. You just plug it in and, well, hopefully it works. Now, a sad thing about this, if you buy it in this form, it's only available ready-made. But if you buy it as the preamp only board, you can buy it as a kit form, and you do save quite a bit of money on that. But why it's not available in kit form in the chassis I don't know. Maybe somebody would offer that combination. The point of the video is, if you saw a preamp in a shop, say for example, and it says it costs $500 to $600, you'd think, well, it should be pretty good for that. And you'd be right, it would be pretty good. But the point of this video is, take away the case, the extra inputs and the balanced circuitry, and you will get exactly the same sound for $20. The cheap and crappy $20 preamp isn't really sound, it doesn't really sound like a cheap and crappy preamp, as I've shown you in the course of these videos. These are but largely do-it-yourself kits. Can you imagine if exactly the same circuitry was available from your local shop? In other words, it's manufactured, it's then transported, there's tax added, the dealer's going to add 30 to 40% profit. All of a sudden, your $500 preamp is now an $800 preamp. In the real world, it still sounds exactly the same as the $20 preamp. I've given you the options. It's up to you. If you can afford $500 or $600 and you just want it to look nice and it will sound good, you buy the expensive version. But if you're poor like me, just a poor pensioner, you buy the kit and build it yourself and put it in a box of your choice, or not, as the case may be. Anyway, that's enough waffle. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Oh, gee. Every video of mine has a gaffe in it, doesn't it? I make a mistake. I should say thank you well, I thank you for watching as well, but thank you for watching. I do appreciate it, and please leave your comments. You don't have to agree with me. I read all the comments and I will reply to any that I can. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.